Now that you have learned the different characteristics of a good RRLS, let us now try to narrow down the different, let's say, guidelines on how you can write effectively your RRLS, starting with the different entries that you must highlight or, let's say, give resources to in your research paper. So, starting with this example. So, we have here let's say, excerpts of RRLS for the Linea Philippinensis and Curcuma longa. So these, let's say, entries of RRLS are actually, let's say, entries for source resources for your independent variables. Therefore, your RLS must contain sources that will identify your independent variables. Next, we have the following examples: Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Staphylococcus aureus, and Escherichia coli. Okay, so these are, let's say, examples of bacteria to be used in your study, and they will be, let's say, directly affected by your independent variable. Therefore, these entries pertain to your dependent variable. Hence, your RLS must contain sources that will identify your dependent variables. Okay, next, we have the following examples. We have zone of inhibition and rate of inhibition equilibrium. Okay, so these, let's say, entries are actually quantifiable in nature, just like what we discussed in our previous, let's say, lesson regarding the definition of terms. These quantifiable entries are known as the measurable variables. Hence, your RLS must also identify, or let's say, give sources to your measurable variables. Okay, next, just like in the definition of terms, we have here antibacterial agent and bacterial pathogens. Okay, so these terms are actually important terms that are, let's say, correlated to your IV and your DV. Okay, meaning to say you must also indicate entries for your RLS that will highlight the important terms related to your independent variable and dependent variable. Okay, identify the different important terms that are related, or let's say that will give relevance to your IV and your DV. Okay, next. So after knowing the different entries that you must include in your, let's say, RRLS, let us try to, let's say, narrow down some examples that will highlight the formatting of how you can write, or let's say, interconnect your RRLS entries from one another. So let us have this example. Okay, so you know this very well. You encountered this guideline in writing your background of the study. So to connect one entry, so here in our upper portion of our example, we have the last paragraph from our previous entry. And then we entered another entry on our next paragraph. Now, to connect those entries, we ended the first paragraph with this single sentence that mentions the next entry in your RRLS. Therefore, there is a transition between one entry to another. Okay? And to have transition from one entry to another, we must use what we call the transitional sentences. Okay? So in writing the stream of your RLS, you must connect the preceding term towards the next term. Okay? Or let's say towards the term following it using a let's say transitional devices or transitional sentences. Okay, so that is, let's say, an important guideline on how you can show interconnection from one entry of your RLS to another. Next, so most of the time, okay, researchers perceive RRLS as a decoration of the research paper. Why? Why decoration? Because most of the time, the panelists do not, let's say, they do not take notice of the different entries written in your RRLS unless it will support your study. That is why your RRLS also appear in this part of your research paper. Okay? This part of your research paper is known as the results and discussion, or the chapter 4. Okay? And in order for you to support your findings in your chapter 4, you must include several RRLS. And this RRLS, okay, this RRLS always, let's say, include citations. Okay? So to indicate, let's say, a supporting resource, you must indicate citations. That is why by using RRLS, we can draw conclusion from our findings. And this RRLS will support the results of your study. So that is one of the importance of writing the RRLS. So it will support the conclusion, okay, and the findings in your results and discussion. Next, in writing the RRLS part of your research paper, okay, we have here our citations, correct? And notice, let's say, notice the several names appearing in our citations. Are they considered to be many or few? Okay, so obviously, we have here several, and we have here many citations that, let's say, prove or give evidence to our entry in our RRLS. Therefore, your RRLS must contain at minimum 10 citations per term. Okay, why is it that? Why is it that we need, let's say, numerous citations per term for our RRLS? It is because the more the author that supports your study, the more reliable it is. Okay? And the more the reliable your, let's say, your resources, the more valid your support for your findings and conclusion. That is why your RLS part of your research paper must contain at minimum 10 citations per entry or per term you are, let's say, describing. Okay? So that will be our seventh guideline in writing our RLS. Next, we have here an example. So take notice, class, of the highlighted terms. So we have here our highlighted phrases. We have here killing or reducing the metabolic activity of bacteria. We have reduced the prevalence of plaque-related diseases. And we have here agents to selectively destroy bacteria. Okay, if you were to analyze the following phrases, do you think that they contain a single idea? Do you think that they contain, let's say, a singular main idea? Obviously, the answer is yes. So we have here killing or reducing bacteria, reducing bacteria. We have here destroying bacteria. Okay? They contain, let's say, a single main idea. And if we have recurring main idea in a single paragraph, is it considered to be redundant or not? Obviously, the answer is that they are, let's say, they appear redundant. And that is, let's say, very wrong in writing the RRLS. That is why you must avoid redundant or recurring information. Okay, and to avoid redundant or recurring information, you must synthesize your gathered RRLS. Okay, when we say synthesize, you must compress or you must summarize it in a single, let's say, idea or in a single paragraph. Okay, so the importance of having a synthesized RLS is to have a more comprehensive and concise text. Okay, and once we, let's say, synthesize our RLS, there is no need for us to indicate, let's say, citations one by one per main idea. You can just compress them in a single paragraph and formulate multiple citations. Okay, and when we say multiple citations, we have, let's say, let's say, a single pair of parentheses, and then we separate the authors using a semicolon. Okay? And this only appears at the end of the paragraph. okay, in a parenthetical manner. So this is one guideline that most of the researchers ignore because they think that the more recurring the idea is, the more, let's say, believable it is. But it isn't the case because it will appear redundant, it will appear repetitive. Okay? So you must be concise in, let's say, writing your RLS. And of course, in writing your RLS, it must be written in a systematic order, correct? It must be written in a systematic and organized order. Therefore, to organize the entries in your RLS, you must follow a thematic format. Okay? So the thematic format is that you will arrange the, let's say, entries in your RLS per variable. So you would want to start with independent variable, which is the broadest one. Then you can proceed with the dependent variable, then the measurable variable, and then proceed with the important terms. Okay, so this will be, let's say, the major guidelines that you will follow so that you can effectively write your RRLS. So for our next video presentation, we will now be discussing the different strategies or techniques on how you can write your RRLS.